Hello, this is a book review of this provocative sounding book, Surrounded by Idiots. It's an interesting title. I think one of the reasons why this book has been so successful and it sold millions of copies all around the world is because the title is eye-catching. I stumbled across this in, I think it was a W.H. Smith at a train station. The title stood out, jumped out, and I thought, this looks like an interesting book. Decided to buy it, and it is a good book. It's definitely useful, and there's a lot of content which you can take and apply to improve your ability to build effective, successful relationships with other people, and in particular, avoid conflicts and arguments and disagreements, which doesn't really lead to results or having a productive and meaningful relationship which is going to benefit you and the people around you as much as possible. So it's probably worth talking about why this book is called Surrounded by Idiots. So the author, Thomas Erikson, who is Swedish, decided to give the book this title after meeting a CEO, was either the manager or a CEO, I can't quite remember, in his mid-20s, the manager of a bank. And he went into this bank and everybody disliked this manager. And they actually put a light at the office, the main desk at the front of this building, to indicate whether or not the manager was actually in the building. So it was quite a subtle, hidden signal. If it was red, people that entered the building, the employees, knew that the manager was in the building. And if it was green, they knew it was safe. He wasn't in the building. Quite extreme, quite strange. And he met this manager, and one of the first things the manager said to him was that he is surrounded by idiots. All of the people that work at this bank, all of the employees don't understand anything, they don't get anything done, and he dismissed them all as being idiots. People in Department A, they're all stupid. People in Department B, they're all fools. And the author of this book questioned him, who employed all of these people? And as you can expect, the boss took that very badly and decided to throw the author out of the bank. What the book is really getting at is misunderstanding, not really understanding people, not having self-awareness. He's said it a number of times in a number of interviews and in this book. His intention is to improve people's self-awareness of their own personality and to have more knowledge and understanding of others. Because if you don't understand your own personality, you're going to rub people up the wrong way. You're going to get quite angry and irritated with other people, simply because people are very diverse. There's huge variation in the way people see the world, how they think about the world, what they perceive, their observations. They effectively live in different worlds because they are looking at different things. Two people can look at the same object and see two totally different things. And so the author of this book wanted to dive into this exploration of personality, so that people wouldn't just dismiss the views of others. All these people are wrong, all these people are stupid. It's simply that they are different, their personalities are different, and they see the world differently. And one interesting implication that's threaded throughout this book is that when someone says they're surrounded by idiots, he implies in this book that it's not the people who are idiots. It's the person who dismisses people in that way, because it means they They have no self-awareness. They haven't looked at themselves and thought about how they are being perceived. Because this manager in the bank, he used to go around and just shout at people, often had a volatile temper, quite angry. And people just began to avoid him. They didn't want to be around him, they didn't like him. So he didn't get feedback. He didn't get information which was going to help him make better decisions, get the best out of people in the workplace, and was suffering as a result. He was very unhappy. Incidentally, he was very good when it came to task-oriented behaviour. He was very good with subject matter and of non-human activities. He simply didn't understand people. That was where this manager had gone wrong. He had a great understanding of banking and of details and of the particularities involved in his work, but he simply didn't know how to interact with people, and that was why the environments the author says became so toxic. There was a toxic environment. And so this is why it has the rather facetious title of Surrounded by Idiots, because it's about trying to have more understanding of oneself and of other people and appreciating differences and trying to have teams, have diverse teams with different personalities, because ultimately this is to the benefit of the team. When there's different points of view, when you're using the gifts and talents of others and you're combining them and fusing them together so that they are constructive. So for example, he categorises people into 4 colours, and as you can see by the front cover, there's red people, yellow people, green people and blue people. Some would argue this is a gross oversimplification of personality, and I think that it is to some degree, because there are many factors, there are many determinants which affect people's behaviour, not just merely their personality type. There's their cultural upbringing, there's their background, there's the country that they were born in, because different countries have different cultures. He talks in an interview about how in Sweden they have a different culture when it comes to leadership than in, say, the UK or in the US. In the US and the UK, the CEO is sort of, he or she makes the decisions, and there's a culture of just accepting those decisions, whereas in Sweden it's a bit more egalitarian. There's more equality in the workplace regarding leadership. So there's difference in countries when it comes to how people are placed in the workplace in terms of hierarchy. So there are differences, and that's one factor which simply placing people in the 4 types perhaps overlooks. And of course there is also the environment. Some people act very differently in a particular activity or game or arena environment than they do in another. So a good example of this, for example, when I play football, my personality is quite different from how I am normally. When playing football, I can become very competitive, quite aggressive, very determined to win the match, and so that's how I am on the football field. But mostly outside of competitive sports, I'm an introvert. Prefer to be alone with my own thoughts, reading a book, thinking about concepts, thinking about subject matter discussed in books like this one. So we can behave differently in different environments, and perhaps this is something the book doesn't quite do justice to is in discussing the interplay between the personality and the environment. But nonetheless, this is a great book, and it is useful because I've found the 4 colours as being quite accurate. It's quite low resolution because it doesn't look at the interesting particularities of people and their unique personalities. Everyone has a different personality. 7 billion people on the planet, every one of them is different. And in certain circumstances, those tiny, minuscule differences can lead to very different behaviour, very different decisions, and over time, divergent pathways when you look at their life retrospectively. Tiny little differences in mentality, in beliefs, in values, can lead to very different outcomes. It's why, twins, genetically identical twins, their lives can be very different. And chance plays a role as well. Chance arguably would be part of the environmental component, because in the environment, in the real world, in real life, lots of chance based activity influences events. And due to the butterfly effect, I made a video a few months ago on the butterfly effect, tiny little unforeseeable phenomena can affect people increasingly as they go through life due to the butterfly effect. But leaving that to one side, let's talk about the colours. So first of all, he describes red people. And red people, he says, are the task-oriented extroverts. They're very goal-directed. They are doers. They want to get things done. They often want to be leaders or the decision makers. They often want to be CEOs, managers, the captain of the football team, the manager of the football team. They are deciders. They like making decisions. They can be very bossy and dominant, and they can be perceived as being quite aggressive and rude. They don't really care about other people's feelings or opinions. They've made a decision. They're very strong-willed, ambitious and determined. And he says this is around 10% of people, the author argues, are of the red variety. He does say that people can be a combination of these colours, but he argues that roughly 10% of people have those attributes, have those characteristics. Of course, whilst there are positives, there are also negatives. So one negative aspect of the reds is that they can be perceived as being too aggressive, almost bullying or domineering, if they are not careful, if they're not aware that there is a danger that they are simply making people's lives a misery without even realising it due to their personality. Another aspect is that because they don't really care about details, they just want to get things done as quickly as possible. Time is of the essence to reds. Everything must be done. Time is money. That they can make bad decisions because they don't pay attention to the meticulous, finer details, the small print. So although they are action-orientated, it's no guarantee that they'll make successful leaders, because what they're choosing to do might not be a sensible or a realistic decision. So this is reds. Next we have the yellows. These are people-oriented extroverts, sociable types. They look very smiley people, very happy. They are the talk of the town. They love being around people. In parties, they're often at the centre of a circle, telling a story, telling an interesting anecdote, telling jokes, being funny, full of energy, full of life. They love being around people, and they get their energy from social interaction. Some of the negatives of this personality, so the positives are that they are enthusiastic. They bring warmth, and they make people feel happy and calm, and they make people feel good about themselves because they have an innate ability to tap into human emotion. They have a good intuitive understanding of how people respond emotionally. Some of the negative attributes is that they can be at loggerheads with blues. We'll come on to why in a sec, but the yellows can often talk, and not get anything done. Very often they will leave things half finished. They'll simply talk and not take action. They're not very good listeners either. They're forgetful. You can tell them something, but they're not really listening. They're only interested in what they are saying, and they struggle with listening and taking on board the details and what's the quieter types. They yellows find quieter types, the introverts, boring, and so there's a natural sort of antagonism between the bubbly, energetic yellows and the sort of cold and task-orientated blues. There is also potential conflict between the reds and the greens. Let's talk about the greens. So the greens are the majority of the population, actually. About 40 to 50% of people are greens. Greens are sort of introverted, people-orientated people. Quite conservative, quite stable, cautious, don't like conflict, avoid conflict wherever possible, don't like to be the person to make a decision or to make a judgment, don't see themselves in leadership roles, don't like new things or change, quite sensitive to criticism. On the other hand, they are loyal, they do tend to work hard, they do play by the rules, partly because they hate conflict so much. They're kind of pleasers, people pleasers. One negative aspect that the author of this book has said is that one of the dangers for reds is that if they upset these greens, the greens won't forget about it. They can gossip and talk about the reds behind their back, so they're not very forgiving. And they can criticise, never to the person's face, but sometimes behind the scenes they can moan and groan. But these are the green types. Yeah. And then we have the blue types. These are an interesting group. So these are introverts, task-orientated, object-orientated introverts. They prefer their own thoughts. They're deep thinkers. They're meticulous when it comes to detail. They are questioners. They will ask lots of questions. They'll think slowly, methodically, rationally, logically about everything. They're the type of people, for example, when they buy a microwave, the first thing they would do is read the manual. They would look at the small print in a phone contract. You know, these guys and girls, very much like the microscopic. And one of the negatives with the blues is that, again, they can take very long to get anything done because they are so meticulous. They don't really like making decisions. They like to keep things open because in their way of thinking, the jury is always out because there's always new information which needs to be considered thoughtfully and pondered over. These are pondering people. It's why there's a potential conflict with the yellows, because the yellows to the blues seem very noisy. These guys irritate the blues because the blues like to be in a quiet space, just sitting at the computer maybe and working away, thinking meticulously, methodically, thoughtfully, getting the job done. And they don't like the emotional noise I think it's fair to say the blues would probably consider the yellows noisy people. The yellows, of course, consider the blues boring, tedious, uninteresting. So, you know, they both have a potential conflict. One really great thing about the book is that after he describes the different colours, the different attributes of the colours, he talks about how one can, well, so first of all, you need to kind of decide what colours you are. He says most people are a combination of two colours, possibly three. It's quite rare, but not extremely rare for people to be just one colour. But it's impossible for people to be all four colours equally. People can be all four colours to different degrees, but there is a tendency for, you know, one or two colours to dominate the personality of an individual. So after deciding what colour you are, he gives a number of tips to help with avoiding conflict with the different colours and how to build better relationships with different colours. So for example, when discussing red, he says that in order to get on well with reds, there's a number of things that it's advisable to think about. One is they don't care about details too much. So when dealing with a red, don't talk about, you know, like for example, if we go to the analogy of a football match, you know, the red just wants to know the final score. Doesn't care how many corners there were, how many free kicks there were, what the attendance of the stadium was, you know, who the referee was, how many blades of grass there were on the pitch. The red doesn't care about the detail, just wants to know what's the final score and what's the next fixture list. You know, that's what the red cares about. So one thing that the book suggests is that avoid details, don't make things personal, don't ask a red about his private personal life, his family. He won't take it very well. He'd be like, that's none of your business. You know, we're not here to be friends, we're here to get things done. That's the attitude of the red. Another interesting point in dealing with reds, he says, don't accept or tolerate rudeness, because red people can be quite disagreeable. One of the strategies, he says, is that don't be a doormat. Don't let red people walk all over you. You have to stand up to the reds and you have to tell them when you think they're wrong, because otherwise they simply won't respect you. They'll think you're weak, they'll think you're inefficient, ineffective. But in order to get on with the reds, you have to be straight to the point, tell them what they necessarily don't want to hear, take the conflict, because there'll be some heat as a result of this. But he says this is the best strategy, because the red will begin to trust, you know, the person that does take that approach. But always make it goal-oriented. Never make it personal. Always make it so we're both going to gain. We're going to get this thing done better if you take into consideration what I'm saying. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? We can get this done faster. We can get this done much better. This is a good way to engage and interact with a red. In dealing with a yellow, you have to consider the fact that they are sensitive types, and they're particularly sensitive to the idea of not being liked. If they think that you dislike them or you've been rude to them, they will take it personally and emotionally. They don't like being embarrassed publicly as well. If they feel like you've harmed their reputation, they will get very upset. They have a lot of interpersonal energy, so you need to think about how you can maximise their natural proclivities. Not be too dry, don't be too rational, because they will interpret that as you simply don't like them, or you're offending them, you're criticising them. You do have to, with the yellows, ensure that they've understood what you've said. because they are not very good listeners. In one ear, out the other. You have to make sure that they've actually understood what you've said, and try to ensure that they actually get things done. So if they're doing something, sometimes it's important to encourage the completion of a task and just set deadlines and boundaries to give them more guidance, more guidelines, because otherwise they'll do everything, even inadvertently. A lot of this behaviour is inadvertent. It's just sort of how they are without even thinking about it. And sometimes yellows, they can not get things done. So sometimes more guidance and guidelines might be a way to encourage them to be a little bit more effective. Greens are an interesting variety. What he suggests in the book is that you've got to be sensitive and subtle and soft when dealing with greens, because they are naturally quite self-critical. They don't have inflated egos, they don't have big egos, which is why they don't want to take leadership positions. And it can be quite easy to upset a green and make them feel terrible by criticising them, because they already can possibly not be very happy with themselves. So you've got to be careful how you deal with greens, because, for example, if you criticise a green, it's not necessarily likely to change their behaviour. They're quite steady eddies, they're quite stable characters, they like predictability, and they're kind of stuck in their ways, they have habits. So you have to be careful how you try to influence the greens in what they're doing, because they are naturally conservative, they don't like change. So you have to be careful and sensitive when it comes to greens. And clearly, going back to that bank manager at the start of the book, he wasn't like that at all, and that's why he upset. The majority of people are greens. So you've got to be thoughtful in how you deal with green people. And then we have the blues. So with blues, it's important to insist on things actually being completed with deadlines, because they're simply the slowest worker. They are very effective because they will look in with precision and really turn things upside down, get into the nitty-gritty. So they are effective workers, but you don't want to be overly emotional with a blue, because they tend to dislike it. They prefer facts over feelings. They want to talk about what is, not necessarily what could be. So you have to think about how a blue is going to actually interpret your words. It's better to be methodical and to the point, and talk about the task at hand, and not just talk with word salads. They don't appreciate word salads. So these are the blues. So he talks about how the different personalities and how one can get the best out of people and take on board, the great diversity there is in the world. And therefore I think it's useful, because there is so much conflict. So many people actually quite dislike their job. He was talking in an interview about how a very large number of people, I think it might be 50%, you'll need to check this yourself, but I think it's something like 50% of people really dislike their job, and probably their relationships with people in the workplace, how they interact with other people, that has a huge impact on the enjoyability of a job. It is so important to get on with people, and this book will definitely help you to achieve that, to appreciate people do not see the world the same way that you do. If you're going to be effective, if you're going to be happier, it's important to appreciate that. And this book gives lots of sound advice on understanding the different attributes that people have. So it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. He has given quite a few interviews on YouTube as well, and they're very informative. He's written a number of other books, starting with Surrounded By. So I think there's another one, Surrounded by Liars, Surrounded by Psychopaths, Surrounded by... can't quite remember, but there's around 6 or 7 books that he has written, you know, with a similar title. So do check it out. Go to, you know, Amazon or the local bookstore, and check out the book. Thank you very much.